A winter's decision. The sharp chill of the December wind cut through the quiet streets, carrying the faint scent of snow and the distant melody of "O Holy Night" from a nearby church. Officer Daniel Carter's patrol car rolled slowly through the neighborhood, the red and blue lights casting fleeting patterns on frost-covered windows. He glanced at the dashboard clock, 9:42 p.m. Another quiet night, his partner had muttered earlier before signing off, leaving Daniel to finish the last hour of his shift solo. It wasn't unusual for Daniel to volunteer for the late-night patrols. The stillness gave him time to think, and tonight he needed it. His wife, Laura, had given him the silent treatment for a week after another missed family dinner. Their son, Jake, was growing quieter too, his bright eyes dimmed with disappointment. A crackle on the radio broke the silence. All units, armed robbery in progress at Grant's corner store. Shots fired. Repeat, shots fired. Proceed with caution. Daniel's heart quickened. He flipped the siren switch and pressed the gas pedal, the patrol car roaring to life as it tore through the icy streets. Arriving at the scene, Daniel's experienced eyes immediately surveyed the chaos. Through the foggy storefront glass, he could make out a masked man waving a gun, his frantic movements betraying his fear. Behind the counter, a trembling cashier ducked, shielding themselves as best they could. A young boy, no older than 8, knelt beside a motionless woman on the floor, his small hands pressing desperately against her bleeding side. "Mom, stay awake, please." The boy's cries pierced through the thick winter air, sending a chill down Daniel's spine that had nothing to do with the temperature. Daniel gripped his service weapon and approached the entrance cautiously. The automatic doors slid open with a faint chime, and the warm air mixed with the tension inside. "Police." Daniel's voice was firm but calm. "Put the weapon down, and no one gets hurt." The robber whipped around, his hand shaking as he pointed the gun toward Daniel. "Stay back, man. Don't come any closer," he shouted, his voice cracking under the weight of desperation. Daniel raised his free hand, the other steady on his firearm. "Nobody needs to get hurt tonight. Let's talk about this." "I don't want to talk," the robber snapped. I just need the money, okay? Just back off." Daniel's eyes darted to the boy, who was sobbing uncontrollably. Blood pooled around the woman, her breaths shallow. Daniel's instincts screamed at him to act fast. "Listen," Daniel said, his voice softening. "The boy's mother needs help. Let him go. Focus on me, and we can work this out." The gunman hesitated, his gaze flickering between the boy, the mother, and Daniel. "You don't understand," the man yelled, his grip tightening on the gun. "This wasn't supposed to happen." The boy's cries grew louder. "Mom, please wake up." Time slowed as the robber's hand jerked toward the child. Daniel acted on instinct, firing 2 quick shots. The man crumpled to the ground, the gun clattering from his hand. Daniel rushed forward, sliding to his knees beside the mother and her son. Hey, he said, his voice steady despite the adrenaline surging through him. "I'm here to help." The boy's tear-streaked face turned to him. "Please save her. She's my mom." Daniel pressed his jacket against the woman's wound, his hands firm but careful. "Stay with me," he urged the woman. Her eyes fluttered open briefly, her lips forming silent words. "Isaiah," she whispered, her gaze locking onto her son. "Be brave." The sirens in the distance grew louder, but Daniel could feel the life slipping away from her. Her hand fell limp, and the boy's wails echoed in the small store. "I'm so sorry," Daniel murmured, his voice breaking. He wrapped his arms around the boy, shielding him from the sight of his mother's lifeless body. The flashing lights of backup units painted the scene in harsh, cold colors, but Daniel's focus was on the trembling child in his arms. The boy clung to him as if Daniel were the only thing keeping him from being swept away by the storm of grief. "What's your name?" Daniel asked gently. "Isaiah," the boy stammered, his voice barely audible. Daniel pulled out his badge, pressing it into the boy's small hand. Isaiah, this is my badge number. If you ever need anything, you call me, okay? Isaiah nodded, his tear-filled eyes staring up at Daniel with a mixture of fear and trust. As paramedics arrived and began their work, Daniel stayed by Isaiah's side until the boy was taken into the care of social services. Watching him disappear into the back of the ambulance, Daniel felt a hollow ache in his chest. He had done everything he could, but it didn't feel like enough. That night, as he sat alone in his dimly lit living room, Daniel replayed the scene over and over in his mind. The woman's final words, the look in Isaiah's eyes. It all lingered like a ghost. He wondered if Isaiah would ever truly recover, if the boy would grow up cursing the world for taking his mother, or if he'd find a way to heal. Daniel didn't know then that this moment, this decision to hand a boy his badge number, would set off a chain of events that would come full circle in ways he could never have imagined. A boy's new world. Isaiah sat silently in the back seat of the social worker's car, clutching Daniel's badge number in his small hand as though it were a life raft in a stormy sea. His eyes, red and swollen from crying, stared blankly out the window at the unfamiliar streets. The city lights blurred into streaks, reflecting the turmoil in his mind. His mother's face, her final words, played on an endless loop in his head, each memory slicing deeper into the raw wound left behind by her absence. Angela Collins, the seasoned social worker driving the car, glanced at Isaiah in the rearview mirror. She'd worked with countless children, each carrying their own unbearable weight of loss, but something about Isaiah struck her differently. Maybe it was the quiet strength he exuded, even in his grief. Or perhaps it was the way he clung to the small piece of paper in his hand, as though it held answers to questions too big for his young heart to process. "We're almost there, Isaiah," Angela said gently, breaking the silence. "The Hendersons are nice people. They have a big backyard and a dog named Max. I think you'll like them." Isaiah didn't respond. He wasn't sure what he was supposed to feel. His mother had been his world, his anchor, and now she was gone. The thought of living with strangers felt wrong, like putting on a coat that didn't belong to him. He tightened his grip on the badge number, the edges of the paper crinkling under his fingers. The car pulled up to a modest two-story house with a neatly trimmed lawn and warm lights spilling from the windows. A man and a woman, both in their late 40s, stood on the porch. They wore hopeful smiles, but there was an undercurrent of nervousness in their postures. Angela opened Isaiah's door and knelt down to his level. "These are Mr. and Mrs. Henderson," she said softly. "They're here to take care of you." Isaiah hesitated, his small frame rigid with fear. "Can I stay with Officer Carter?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Angela's heart ached at the question. "Officer Carter has an important job," she explained gently. "But he gave you that badge number because he wants you to remember you're not alone. You're safe here, Isaiah. I promise." The Hendersons stepped forward, their smiles kind but unsure. "Hi, Isaiah," Mrs. Henderson said, her voice warm and motherly. "We've been looking forward to meeting you." Isaiah nodded slightly, not trusting himself to speak. He followed Angela up the porch steps, his small backpack slung over one shoulder. Inside, the house smelled of fresh cookies and pine from the Christmas tree standing in the corner of the living room. It should have felt welcoming, but to Isaiah, it only emphasized how far he was from the life he knew. Max, a golden retriever, bounded over, his tail wagging furiously. The dog nudged Isaiah's hand with his nose, a ball of fur and enthusiasm that didn't understand the weight of the boy's grief. Isaiah couldn't help but smile faintly, a fleeting moment of light breaking through the storm clouds in his heart. The first few weeks in the Henderson household were a blur of new routines and awkward adjustments. The couple tried their best to make Isaiah feel at home, but the boy remained withdrawn, his silence hanging heavy in the air. At night, he'd lie awake staring at the ceiling, the badge number tucked under his pillow. Sometimes, when the memories became too much, he'd take it out and trace the numbers with his finger, whispering Officer Carter's name like a mantra. Mrs. Henderson, patient and understanding, often left small notes in his lunchbox with messages like, "We're proud of you," or "You're doing great." Mr. Henderson taught him how to throw a football in the backyard, their laughter echoing against the wooden fence. Max, ever the loyal companion, rarely left Isaiah's side, curling up at his feet during homework or licking away stray tears when no one was watching. One day, while sorting through a box of his belongings from his old home, Isaiah found a photograph of his mother. She was smiling, her arms wrapped around him as they stood in front of a park fountain. The sight of her face, so vibrant and full of life, brought a fresh wave of tears. He clutched the photo to his chest and sobbed, the pain as sharp as it had been that terrible night. Mrs. Henderson found him sitting on the floor of his room, the photo in one hand and the badge number in the other. She sat beside him without a word, her presence a quiet reassurance. After a while, she spoke. "It's okay to miss her, Isaiah," she said softly. "She loved you more than anything, and that love doesn't go away. It stays with you, even when it hurts." Isaiah looked at her, his big brown eyes filled with questions he couldn't yet articulate. "Do you think she's watching me?" he asked, like from heaven. Mrs. Henderson smiled gently. "I think she's always with you, in your heart, and I think she'd be so proud of how brave you've been." The boy nodded, his grip on the photo tightening. "I want to make her proud," he whispered. At school, Isaiah struggled to find his footing. The other kids didn't understand the quiet boy who barely spoke, who sat alone during lunch and stayed behind in the classroom during recess. But one day, during an art project, a girl named Mia noticed Isaiah sketching a picture of his mother. She sat down beside him, her curiosity outweighing the social boundaries of second grade. "Is that your mom?" she asked, pointing to the drawing. Isaiah hesitated, then nodded. "Yeah. She's really pretty," Maya said with a smile. "My mom says I'm good at drawing too. Can I sit here?" For the first time in weeks, Isaiah felt a flicker of normalcy. "Okay," he said quietly. Their friendship blossomed, and soon Mia became a constant presence in his life. She didn't push him to talk about his past, but simply sat with him, her chatter filling the silence he used to find unbearable. With her encouragement, Isaiah joined the art club, where he discovered a talent for painting that became his refuge. Months turned into years, and Isaiah began to heal, though the scars of that night never fully faded. He carried Officer Carter's badge number with him everywhere, a symbol of the kindness that had kept him afloat when he felt like drowning. The Hendersons officially adopted him, giving him a stable home and a foundation of love and support. But no matter how much time passed, Isaiah never forgot the man who had knelt beside him on the cold tile floor of that convenience store. As he grew older, Isaiah's determination to honor his mother's memory solidified into a goal: to make a difference in the world, just as Officer Carter had done for him. He worked tirelessly in school, earning scholarships and accolades that brought tears of pride to the Hendersons' eyes. But in his heart, he always wondered if the man who had saved his life even remembered him. Isaiah made a silent promise to himself. One day, he would find Officer Carter. And when he did, he would repay the kindness that had saved not just his life, but his hope for the future. A journey of gratitude. The rhythmic hum of the train filled the cabin as Isaiah stared out of the window, his reflection blending with the blur of city lights streaking past. In his lap, an envelope rested, the edges worn from years of handling. Inside was Officer Daniel Carter's badge number, scribbled on a piece of paper now yellowed with age. Though he'd memorized the number long ago, he still carried it with him as a reminder of the man who had once knelt beside him in the darkest moment of his life. It had taken Isaiah years to gather the courage to seek Daniel out. After graduating law school and establishing his practice, he had built a life his mother would have been proud of. He'd worked tirelessly to help families navigate the legal system, ensuring no child would feel as lost as he had. But amidst the accolades and the accomplishments, a part of him still longed to reconnect with the man who had saved him. Isaiah unfolded the letter he had written weeks ago, the words scrawled in neat handwriting that betrayed the emotional weight of his intentions. "Dear Officer Carter, You may not remember me, but I've never forgotten you. My name is Isaiah Thompson. 22 years ago, you saved my life during a robbery at Grant's Corner Store. I was just a scared kid clutching my mother's hand as she fought to stay alive. You couldn't save her, but you saved me. And that act changed everything. I've carried your badge number with me all these years. It became a symbol of hope and strength when I needed it most. Because of you, I found the courage to keep going, to build a life that honors my mother's memory. I've thought about writing this letter for a long time. I'd like to meet you, to thank you in person. You gave me more than just a badge number that night. You gave me the belief that even in the darkest times, there's someone willing to stand with you. If you're willing, please let me know. I owe you more than words can say. Sincerely, Isaiah Thompson. Isaiah folded the letter carefully, his hand steady despite the nerves fluttering in his chest. He wasn't sure how Daniel would react, or if he would respond at all, but the decision to reach out felt right. It was time to close the circle. The officer's burden. Meanwhile, Daniel Carter sat in the dimly lit kitchen of his small apartment, a steaming mug of coffee in front of him. Retirement hadn't brought the peace he'd hoped for. The memories of his years as a police officer still haunted him, particularly that night at Grant's Corner Store. He rubbed his temples, staring at the stack of unopened mail on the counter. Most of it was junk, but one envelope caught his eye. The handwriting was unfamiliar, neat but deliberate, as if the sender had taken great care in crafting it. Daniel hesitated before opening it, his calloused fingers fumbling slightly with the paper. As he read the letter, his breath caught in his throat. The name Isaiah Thompson leaped off the page, transporting him back to the cold winter night that had changed both their lives. He remembered the boy's tear-streaked face, the desperation in his voice as he begged for his mother to stay awake. He remembered the weight of failure that had settled in his chest when he couldn't save her. The letter brought a mixture of emotions, relief, pride, and guilt. He'd always wondered what had happened to Isaiah, if the boy had found a way to move forward. Now, reading Isaiah's words, Daniel felt a spark of something he hadn't experienced in years: hope. The meeting. A week later, Isaiah found himself standing on the doorstep of Daniel's apartment, his heart pounding in his chest. He'd been surprised when Daniel had called, his voice gruff but kind as he invited Isaiah over for coffee. Now, standing here, he felt the weight of 2 decades pressing down on him. The door creaked open, revealing a man who looked older than Isaiah had imagined, but still carried the same quiet strength he remembered. Daniel's hair was streaked with gray, and lines etched his face, but his piercing blue eyes were unmistakable. "Isaiah," Daniel said, his voice thick with emotion. "You've grown up." Isaiah smiled, extending his hand. "It's good to see you again, Officer Carter." Daniel shook his head, a small smile playing on his lips. "Just call me Daniel. Come on in." The apartment was modest but tidy, filled with reminders of a life spent in service, a framed photograph of Daniel in his police uniform, a plaque commemorating his years of service, and a shelf lined with books about law enforcement and justice. Isaiah's eyes lingered on the photograph, the younger version of Daniel standing tall and confident. "I didn't think I'd ever hear from you," Daniel admitted as they sat at the small kitchen table. "Not after all these years." "I've thought about reaching out for a long time," Isaiah replied. "I wasn't sure if you'd even remember me." Daniel chuckled, though there was no humor in it. "I never forgot you, Isaiah, or your mother. That night, it stayed with me." Isaiah nodded, his expression somber. "It stayed with me too, but in a different way. That badge number you gave me, it became my anchor. Whenever things got tough, I'd hold on to it and remember that someone cared enough to save me." Daniel's throat tightened, and he looked down at his hands. "I wish I could have done more. I wish I could have saved her." "You did everything you could," Isaiah said firmly. "And because of you, I had a chance to build a life. That's why I'm here. To thank you, not just for saving me, but for showing me what it means to care about others." the start of a new chapter. As the evening wore on, the two men shared stories, bridging the gap of time with laughter and reflection. Isaiah spoke of his work as a lawyer, his dedication to helping children in the foster system. Daniel shared his struggles with retirement and the guilt he still carried from his years on the force. By the time Isaiah left, there was a sense of closure between them, but also the promise of something new, a friendship built on shared experiences and mutual respect. For Daniel, Isaiah's visit was more than a thank you. It was a reminder that even in moments of failure, there could be redemption. And for Isaiah, reconnecting with Daniel was the final step in a journey that had begun on a cold winter night under the fluorescent lights of a corner store. The weight of the past. The days following their reunion were transformative for both Isaiah and Daniel. The emotional weight each had carried for over 2 decades seemed to shift slightly, as if sharing their stories had lightened the burden. Yet there were still shadows lurking, unspoken truths, and lingering questions that neither man had fully confronted. A new connection. Isaiah decided to make their next meeting more personal. He invited Daniel to his home, a spacious yet warm house that stood in stark contrast to Daniel's modest apartment. The house was alive with the sounds of children's laughter and the smells of Camille's cooking. It was a testament to the life Isaiah had built, one that honored his mother's memory in every way possible. Daniel arrived early, nervous but trying not to show it. He parked his car in front of Isaiah's home, marveling at the neatly trimmed lawn and the blooming flowers that lined the walkway. He hadn't been in a house like this in years, not since his own family had fractured. The front door opened before Daniel could knock, and a bright-eyed girl peeked out. "Are you the police officer my dad talks about?" she asked with wide-eyed curiosity. Daniel smiled, crouching slightly to meet her gaze. "I used to be, and you must be Lily." Her face lit up. "Dad said you're a hero. Is that true?" Before Daniel could respond, Isaiah appeared, gently guiding Lily inside. "Let's not overwhelm him, sweetheart," he said with a chuckle. "Come on in, Daniel." The warmth of Isaiah's home was almost overwhelming. Family photos adorned the walls, Isaiah and Camille on their wedding day, Lily holding a soccer trophy, and candid moments of laughter and love. Daniel felt a pang of regret as he thought about his own home, which lacked the vibrancy and connection this one radiated. Over dinner, they spoke of their lives. Camille asked thoughtful questions about Daniel's time as a police officer, and Lily listened intently as Daniel recounted stories from his career. For the first time in years, Daniel felt not like a relic of the past, but like someone whose experiences still mattered. The haunting silence. Later that evening, after Lily had gone to bed and Camille had excused herself to give the men space, Isaiah led Daniel to the living room. A fire crackled softly in the fireplace, its glow casting dancing shadows across the room. "I wanted to show you something," Isaiah said, pulling out a leather-bound journal. This was my mother's. Daniel took the journal carefully, as if it were a fragile artifact. The worn cover and faded pages told of years of use, and as he opened it, he was struck by the neat handwriting that filled its pages. "She used to write down everything," Isaiah explained. "Her thoughts, her dreams, even her plans for our future. After she died, this journal was all I had of her." Daniel flipped through the pages, his throat tightening as he read snippets of Linda's life. Her love for Isaiah was evident in every word, from her detailed plans to ensure he got a good education to her reflections on the challenges of being the single mother. One entry, dated just a week before her death, caught Daniel's eye. "Isaiah asked me today why he doesn't have a dad like the other kids at school. It broke my heart to see the sadness in his eyes. I told him that he doesn't need a dad because he has me, and I'll always protect him. But sometimes I wish there was someone else to share this burden. Someone who could help him grow into the incredible man I know he'll become." Daniel closed the journal, his hands trembling. "She loved you so much," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "You were her whole world." Isaiah nodded, his expression somber. "I know. and I spent my whole life trying to live up to the dreams she had for me. But there's one thing I've never been able to let go of." Daniel looked at him, his chest tightening. "What's that?" Isaiah hesitated, then met Daniel's gaze. "That night, do you ever wonder if there was something more you could have done? If you could have saved her?" Confronting the truth, the question hit Daniel like a physical blow. He leaned back in his chair, his mind racing as he replayed that night in vivid detail. The smell of blood, the sound of Isaiah's cries, the weight of Linda's lifeless body. It was a memory he had tried to bury, but it had never stayed buried for long. "Every day," Daniel admitted, his voice barely above a whisper, "I've asked myself that question every day for 22 years. And the truth is, I don't know. I did everything I was trained to do, but it wasn't enough. It never feels like it was enough." Isaiah leaned forward, his hands clasped tightly together. "I spent so many nights wondering the same thing. But hearing you say that, I don't know, it helps. It makes it easier to believe that maybe it wasn't anyone's fault." "It wasn't," Daniel said firmly. "Isaiah, your mother's death was a tragedy, but it wasn't because you or I failed her. Sometimes, the world just isn't fair." The room fell silent, the only sound the crackling of the fire. For the first time, both men felt a sense of release, as though a heavy chain had been loosened. A shared purpose. Before Daniel left that night, Isaiah stopped him at the door. "There's one more thing I want to ask," he said. Daniel raised an eyebrow. "What's that?" "I've been thinking about starting a foundation," Isaiah explained. "Something that helps kids in the foster system. Kids who've lost their parents, kids like I was. I want you to be a part of it." Daniel's eyes widened. "Me? Isaiah, I don't know anything about running a foundation." "You know what it's like to be there for someone when they need it most," Isaiah said. "You've lived it. That's what these kids need, someone who understands." Daniel hesitated, the weight of the offer pressing down on him. But as he looked into Isaiah's determined eyes, he felt a spark of something he hadn't felt in years. Purpose. "Okay," Daniel said finally. "I'm in." Isaiah smiled. A genuine, heartfelt smile that seemed to light up the room. "We'll make a difference together, Daniel, just like you made a difference for me." As Daniel drove home that night, he felt a sense of hope that had been absent for far too long. His life wasn't over. In fact, it felt like it was just beginning. Building bridges. The days turned into weeks, and the foundation Isaiah envisioned began to take shape. He named it the Linda Hope Foundation, in honor of his mother. Its mission was simple but profound: to provide resources, mentorship, and support for children in the foster system and those who had experienced the trauma of losing a parent. For Daniel, being part of something so deeply personal and impactful was like finding a new identity. The foundation gave him purpose, a way to channel the regret and guilt he had carried for years into meaningful action. But as he became more involved, the effort also forced him to confront unresolved parts of his own past, most notably his fractured relationship with his daughter, Claire. A long-lost bond. Daniel hadn't spoken to Claire in almost 10 years. Their relationship had eroded slowly, worn down by the same mistakes that had cost him his marriage. Missed birthdays, broken promises, and the relentless pull of his job had created a chasm between them that neither had dared to cross. But watching Isaiah pour his heart into the foundation stirred something in Daniel. If Isaiah could honor his mother's memory while reaching out to others, maybe Daniel could take a step toward repairing his relationship with Claire. Late one evening, after hours of second-guessing himself, Daniel picked up the phone and dialed her number. Each ring felt like an eternity, his palms sweating as he prepared for the possibility that she wouldn't answer. "Hello." Claire's voice was cautious, uncertain. Daniel froze for a moment, the sound of her voice hitting him like a wave of nostalgia and regret. "Hi, Claire," he said finally. "It's Dad." There was a long pause. "Dad," she said slowly, the word carrying an edge of surprise. "This is unexpected. I know, Daniel admitted. I've been thinking about you a lot lately. I wanted to say I'm sorry. For what? Claire's voice was guarded, but Daniel could hear the emotion beneath it. For everything, he said softly. For not being there when you needed me. For letting my work take over my life. For making you feel like you weren't my priority. I know I can't change the past, but I want to do better now. Claire didn't respond immediately, and Daniel's heart sank as the silence stretched. Then she let out a shaky breath. It's been a long time, Dad. I know, he said, his voice cracking. But I'm here now, if you'll let me be. Maybe we can meet for coffee, Claire said finally. Just to talk. Daniel felt a wave of relief wash over him. I'd like that, he said, his voice thick with emotion. The foundation's first step. Meanwhile, Isaiah was pouring every ounce of his energy into launching the Linda Hope Foundation. He secured a small office space downtown, its walls bare except for a single framed photo of his mother. He worked tirelessly to gather funding, leaning on his network of colleagues and friends to spread the word. Camille stood by his side, offering unwavering support, while Lily often accompanied him to the office, drawing pictures to hang on the walls. Daniel quickly became an integral part of the team. His years of experience in law enforcement gave him a unique perspective on the challenges faced by vulnerable children. He spearheaded a mentorship program, recruiting retired officers, social workers, and community leaders to act as role models for the kids they aimed to help. One of the foundation's first initiatives was a weekend retreat for foster children. They rented a camp in the woods, complete with cabins, a lake, and endless activities. Isaiah and Daniel worked together to plan every detail, from the icebreakers to the workshops focused on building confidence and resilience. The retreat was a resounding success. Watching the children laugh, learn, and forge new friendships was a deeply emotional experience for both men. One night, as they sat by the campfire, Isaiah turned to Daniel. "This is what I always hoped for," he said, his voice low. "A chance to give these kids what I needed when I was their age." Daniel nodded, staring into the flames. "You're giving them more than that, Isaiah. You're giving them hope." Facing old wounds. Despite the progress they were making, both Isaiah and Daniel knew there were still personal battles to fight. For Isaiah, it was the lingering guilt he carried over his mother's death. For Daniel, it was his relationship with Claire and the mistakes of his past. One afternoon, as they worked side by side in the foundation's office, Isaiah broke the silence. "You should bring Claire here," he said. Daniel looked up, startled. "Claire? Why?" "She's part of your story," Isaiah said simply. "And this foundation is as much about healing as it is about helping others. Maybe seeing what you're doing here could help her understand how much you've changed." Daniel considered this, his brow furrowed. "She's never seen this side of me," he admitted. "I don't know if she'd even want to." "She agreed to meet you for coffee, didn't she?" Isaiah pointed out. "That's a start. Rebuilding trust." When Daniel finally met Claire for coffee, it was both awkward and emotional. They sat at a small table in a cozy cafe, the air heavy with unspoken words. Claire, now in her mid-30s, was a successful graphic designer with a quiet confidence that reminded Daniel of her mother. "You look good," Daniel said, breaking the silence. "You've grown into an incredible woman." Claire gave a small smile. "Thanks. You look tired." Daniel chuckled, the tension easing slightly. "Retirement will do that to you." As they talked, Daniel shared stories of his time with the Linda Hope Foundation. He spoke of Isaiah, of the retreat, and of his desire to make a difference in the lives of children. Claire listened intently, her expression softening as he spoke. "You really care about this, don't you?" she asked. "I do," Daniel said. "It's the first time in a long time I felt like I'm doing something that matters." Claire nodded slowly. Maybe I could help. I do graphic design, and it sounds like you could use a website." Daniel's heart swelled with gratitude. That would mean the world to me, Claire. Thank you. A legacy of hope. With Claire's help, the Linda Hope Foundation's presence grew. The website she designed became a hub for resources, donation drives, and success stories. The foundation gained momentum, attracting more volunteers and funding. Isaiah and Daniel worked tirelessly, but they also found time to reflect on their journey. One evening, as they stood in the foundation's office, Isaiah looked at the photo of his mother on the wall. "She'd be proud of you," Daniel said quietly. "She'd be proud of us," Isaiah replied. For the first time in years, both men felt a sense of peace. Together, they had turned their pain into purpose, creating a legacy that would change countless lives. An invitation to heal. A week after their coffee meeting, Claire emailed Daniel a draft design for the Linda Hope Foundation's website. The sleek, modern layout reflected her professional touch, but what struck Daniel the most was the banner at the top. A collage of children's smiling faces overlaid with the words, "Hope lives here." Daniel called Claire immediately. "It's perfect," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "You've captured everything we're trying to do." "I'm glad you like it," Claire replied, her tone lighter than it had been in years. "I wasn't sure if it was too much." "It's exactly right," Daniel assured her. Then, hesitating for a moment, he added, "I'd love for you to see it in action. We're having a community event at the foundation next weekend. It would mean a lot if you came." Claire was silent for a moment, and Daniel's heart pounded as he waited for her response. Finally, she said, "I'll think about it." The community event. The day of the event arrived, and the foundation's modest office was transformed into a lively hub of activity. Isaiah had pulled together a network of local businesses, community leaders, and volunteers to host a day of workshops, games, and resource fairs for families in need. Children ran through the makeshift play area, their laughter filling the air as volunteers handed out balloons and snacks. In one corner, Daniel manned a mentorship booth, answering questions from parents and guardians about the foundation's programs. Though his smile was genuine, his eyes often flickered toward the door, hoping for Claire's arrival. Isaiah noticed and approached him with a knowing grin. "You've been staring at that door for the past hour," he said. Daniel sighed, running a hand through his hair. "She said she'd think about coming." "That's better than nothing, right?" "Right," Isaiah said, clapping him on the shoulder. "But stop worrying. This event is already a success, thanks to you." Just as Daniel was about to respond, the door opened and Claire stepped inside. She hesitated on the threshold, taking in the bustling activity around her. Her gaze landed on Daniel, and he saw a flicker of uncertainty in her eyes. "Claire," Daniel called, his voice filled with equal parts surprise and relief. He quickly made his way over to her. "You came." "I did," she said, smiling nervously. "I wanted to see what you've been working on." Daniel gestured around the room. "This is it. The Linda Hope Foundation. None of this would have been possible without Isaiah, but it's given me a second chance at a lot of things." Claire nodded, her expression softening as she looked around. "It's amazing, Dad. I'm proud of you." Those words hit Daniel harder than he expected, and he had to take a moment to compose himself. "Thank you, Claire. That means more than you know." A new beginning. Isaiah joined them a few minutes later, greeting Claire warmly. He introduced her to some of the foundation's staff and shared stories about the kids they were helping. Claire listened intently, her initial hesitance giving way to genuine interest. As the day went on, Claire began to see a side of her father she hadn't known existed. He was patient, kind, and deeply invested in the work they were doing. Watching him interact with the children and families, she felt a pang of regret for the years they had spent estranged. When the event wound down, Claire pulled Daniel aside. "I didn't realize how much this meant to you," she said. "I can see why you're so passionate about it." "It's more than just a foundation," Daniel replied. "It's a way to make up for some of the mistakes I've made. And maybe, to show you that I changed." Claire looked at him for a long moment before speaking. "You have changed," she said finally, "and I want to give us another chance." Daniel felt tears prick his eyes, but he smiled through them. "That's all I could ever ask for." The bridge is built. Over the next few months, Claire became more involved with the foundation. She revamped their website, designed promotional materials, and even helped organize events. Her presence not only strengthened the foundation, but also deepened her relationship with her father. For Daniel, the foundation became more than a mission. It became a bridge to the family he thought he had lost. And for Isaiah, it was a chance to turn his mother's legacy into a lasting impact, ensuring that no child would have to navigate loss and hardship alone. One evening, as the three of them sat in the foundation's office finalizing plans for their next project, Isaiah looked at Daniel and Claire. "We've come a long way," he said, his voice filled with gratitude. "And I think we're just getting started." Daniel smiled, the weight of his past finally lifting. "You're right. This is just the beginning. A legacy forged in love." Months after the Linda Hope Foundation's community event, its impact had grown far beyond what Isaiah or Daniel could have imagined. The foundation's programs had reached hundreds of children and families, and its name had become a symbol of hope for those navigating the foster care system and the scars of loss. But the foundation wasn't just transforming lives in the community. It was reshaping the people at its heart. A letter from the past. One crisp autumn morning, Daniel arrived at the foundation's office to find a letter waiting for him. The envelope was addressed in familiar handwriting that made his breath hitch, Claire's. Though their relationship had mended significantly, it was rare for her to communicate outside their regular calls and meetings. Curious and slightly nervous, Daniel opened the letter, unfolding the neatly written pages inside. As he read, his eyes filled with tears. "Dear Dad, I've been thinking a lot about us, about the years we lost and the time we're getting back now. There were so many moments growing up when I was angry at you, and even more when I just felt hurt. I thought that if you cared enough, you'd show up, and when you didn't, I decided you didn't care at all. But seeing you at the foundation, watching you work so hard to help those kids, it's made me realize something I never understood before. You've always cared, Dad. You just didn't know how to show it in the ways I needed. And while I can't get those years back, I'm starting to see the man you are now, and I'm proud to call you my father. Thank you for trying, for showing up now. That means everything. Love, Claire." Daniel's hands trembled as he folded the letter and placed it in his pocket. It was a small gesture, but it carried a weight he had thought impossible to lift. He had spent so many years haunted by his failures as a father, and while the scars of the past remained, Claire's words were like a balm that soothed his deepest wounds. Isaiah's bold vision. Later that day, Isaiah gathered the foundation's team for an important announcement. His usually calm demeanor carried a buzz of excitement, and Daniel couldn't help but smile at the younger man's energy. "I've been thinking about our next step," Isaiah began, addressing the group. "We've done incredible work here, but I want to dream bigger. I want the Linda Hope Foundation to become a national movement." A murmur of excitement rippled through the room as Isaiah outlined his vision. Chapters of the foundation in cities across the country, partnerships with schools and foster agencies, and programs designed to empower children to become leaders in their communities. Daniel leaned back in his chair, pride swelling in his chest. He had seen Isaiah grow from a grieving boy into a man determined to change the world, and it was a privilege to witness this moment. After the meeting, Daniel pulled Isaiah aside. "National expansion," he said with a chuckle. "You're not aiming small, are you?" Isaiah grinned. "If there's one thing my mom taught me, it's that you should never be afraid to dream big." Daniel nodded, his smile softening. "She'd be so proud of you, Isaiah. I hope you know that." "I do," Isaiah replied. "And I hope you know that none of this would have been possible without you. You didn't just save my life that night. You gave me the courage to live it. An unexpected opportunity." As plans for expansion unfolded, a surprising opportunity came their way. A national news outlet had heard about the foundation's work and wanted to feature their story. Isaiah and Daniel were invited to participate in an in-depth interview that would air during prime time. The day of the interview, the studio buzzed with activity. Cameras were adjusted, microphones clipped on, and producers scurried about, preparing for the segment. Daniel sat nervously in his chair, unused to the spotlight, while Isaiah seemed perfectly at ease. The interviewer, a seasoned journalist named Rachel Morgan, began with questions about the Foundation's mission and its impact. Isaiah spoke passionately about their programs and the children they'd helped, his words painting a vivid picture of hope and resilience. Then Rachel turned to Daniel. "Officer Carter, your involvement with the Foundation began because of a single night over 20 years ago. Can you tell us about that experience and how it shaped your journey?" Daniel hesitated, the memories rushing back with startling clarity. "It was a night I'll never forget," he said, his voice steady but tinged with emotion. "I responded to a call about an armed robbery. When I arrived, I found a young boy, Isaiah, trying to save his mother. Despite my best efforts, I couldn't save her." He paused, swallowing hard. "For years, I carried the weight of that night. I wondered if I could have done more, if I'd failed Isaiah and his mother. But reconnecting with Isaiah and being part of this foundation has taught me that even in moments of tragedy, there's a chance for redemption. We can take our pain and turn it into something that helps others." Rachel nodded, her expression thoughtful. "Isaiah, what would you say to Officer Carter now, after all these years?" Isaiah turned to Daniel, his voice steady and filled with emotion. "I'd say thank you. Thank you for being there when I needed you most. Thank you for showing me that even in the darkest moments, there's still kindness and hope. You didn't just save my life. You helped me find my purpose." The room was silent for a moment, the weight of their story hanging in the air. Then Rachel smiled. "It's clear that the Linda Hope Foundation isn't just about helping others. It's about healing too. Thank you both for sharing your journey." A lasting impact. The interview aired to widespread acclaim, bringing a surge of donations and support to the foundation. But for Isaiah and Daniel, the true victory was the connection they had built, not just with each other, but with the countless lives their work touched. Months later, as the foundation opened its first chapter in another city, Daniel and Isaiah stood side by side, watching the ribbon-cutting ceremony. Claire and Camille were there, along with Lily, who beamed with pride as her father and Grandpa Daniel celebrated their success. "I think this is just the beginning," Isaiah said, his voice filled with quiet determination. Daniel nodded, his gaze sweeping over the crowd of children and families. "It's more than I ever thought possible." Together, they had turned tragedy into triumph, creating a legacy that would outlive them both, a legacy forged in love, resilience, and hope. The opening of a new chapter. The Linda Hope Foundation's first expansion into another city marked a significant milestone, but it was only the beginning. Over the next few months, Isaiah and Daniel worked tirelessly to ensure the Foundation's programs were as impactful in the new chapter as they had been in the original. With Claire now officially part of the team as their communications director, their efforts were more polished and effective than ever. At the heart of every meeting, every event, and every decision was the same question: what would Linda want for these children? Isaiah often reflected on the journal entries his mother had written, her dreams for him guiding the Foundation's mission. The Foundation's work was thriving, but so too were the personal connections that had been rekindled. Daniel and Claire's relationship had grown stronger with each passing day. Their weekly dinners were no longer filled with awkward silences, but with laughter, shared memories, and the occasional tear. One evening, after a long day at the office, Isaiah and Daniel sat in the Foundation's now bustling main headquarters. The walls were lined with photos of the children they'd helped, their smiles a testament to the impact of their work. "You ever think about what Linda would say if she could see all this?" Daniel asked, his voice quiet but steady. Isaiah smiled, leaning back in his chair. "All the time. I think she'd probably tell me to stop working so hard and get more sleep. Daniel chuckled, the sound light and genuine. Sounds like something she'd say. But seriously, Isaiah continued, his tone softening, I think she'd be proud. Not just of me, but of all of us. This foundation isn't just her legacy. It's a second chance for all of us to create something meaningful. Daniel nodded, his gaze lingering on a photo of Isaiah as a boy, clutching the badge number he had handed him all those years ago. You've done something incredible, Isaiah, and I'm honored to be a part of it. A celebration of life. As the anniversary of the foundation's creation approached, Isaiah decided to host a gala to celebrate their successes and honor the people who had made it possible. The event would also serve as a fundraiser to support their ongoing expansion efforts. The gala was held in a grand ballroom, its high ceilings adorned with twinkling lights and elegant decorations. Guests from all walks of life filled the room. Donors, volunteers, and families who had been touched by the foundation's work. At the center of it all was a display dedicated to Linda, her photo surrounded by quotes from her journal and stories from the children the foundation had helped. Isaiah took the stage that evening, his voice steady but filled with emotion. This foundation was born out of loss, but it has become a source of hope, he began. It is a testament to the power of kindness, resilience, and love. Tonight, we celebrate not just what we've accomplished, but what we've yet to achieve. Together, we can ensure that no child feels forgotten, that every child knows they matter. The crowd erupted in applause, their energy a reflection of the passion Isaiah poured into his words. When Daniel joined him on stage to share his story, the room fell silent, his gruff voice carrying the weight of years of reflection and redemption. I used to think that the best I could do was make it through each day, Daniel said. But this foundation has shown me that it's never too late to make a difference, to change, to heal, and to help others do the same. Linda's legacy lives on in every smile, every success story, and every life we've touched. The room rose to its feet, the applause thunderous. In that moment, Daniel felt a sense of peace he hadn't known in decades. He had found his purpose, his family, and a way to honor the promises he had made long ago. The final chapter. Years later, the Linda Hope Foundation had grown into a national movement, with chapters in cities across the country. Isaiah continued to lead with the same determination that had driven him from the start. But now he had a team of passionate individuals who shared his vision. Daniel, though no longer actively involved in the day-to-day operations, remained a constant presence. He often visited the foundation's offices, speaking to new mentors and sharing his story with children who saw him as a symbol of hope. One summer afternoon, Daniel sat in a sunlit park, watching Claire play catch with Lily. Isaiah and Camille sat nearby, laughing as they planned their next family trip. Daniel felt a deep contentment, the kind that comes not from perfection, but from the knowledge that broken things can be mended. As the sun began to set, Lily ran over to him, her face flushed with excitement. "Grandpa Daniel, can you tell me the story again? About the night you met Dad?" Daniel smiled, pulling her close. "I've told you that story 100 times, Lily." "I know," she said, her eyes wide with curiosity. "But I like hearing it." Daniel chuckled, his voice warm as he began. It was a cold December night, and the wind was howling. As he recounted the story, Daniel's gaze shifted to Isaiah, who was watching with a smile. The boy he had once saved had grown into a man who was saving countless others. And though Linda wasn't there to see it, her love and sacrifice were woven into every moment, every life touched by the foundation that bore her name. In the end, their story wasn't about loss or guilt. It was a story of hope, redemption, and the unbreakable bonds of love, a legacy that would endure for generations to come.